Welcome to the Friday vlog.
Welcome to the Friday vlog.
Today we're going to talk about nagging in relationships.
That is probably a very good theme to explore.
Well, it's definitely a theme that comes up in the relationship work that we do.
It is a theme that sometimes crops up in our relationship as well.
Yes. And so I am probably the one that is perceived as the nagger in our relationship.
I think it's probably safe to assume that that is correct.
And less so, though, these
Although
days.
I am prone to the odd nag here and there, I'm sure.
You don't really nag me. If you're going to nag anybody, it's going to be the kids.
Okay. I do know that I maybe nag you sometimes.
Oh, I don't even notice it.
Oh, well, good. Well, obviously you're highly evolved.
So for me, one of the things that has been a learning curve around curbing my nagging behavior is recognizing that we have very different standards and expectations and different relationship with things like agreements. And I, in the past, would take things very personally when I perceived we had an agreement and you didn't keep it. And what I understood about that is that you didn't really see agreements in the same way that I saw them.
Well, I think that one of the main difficulties that you and I had when we first met were the not so subtle differences in our cultural backgrounds.
Yes.
So you had your Canadian vernacular, and I had my British vernacular, and on occasion, never the twain shall meet on that front. So there were certain words and expressions that you might use that didn't have the same weight. So had you said to me, "Do you promise?" I would have understood that. But you use this term agreement. Do we have an agreement? An agreement in the scale of commitment doesn't nearly have as much weight as the word promise in my books.
In your mind.
Yeah. So when you were suggesting these agreements, I think it took me a long time to figure out, in your mind, that was a promise.
Yes.
So I broke a lot of promises, basically. Which, when you look at it, that's not a great thing.
No.
But I didn't think agreement just didn't have the same weight or cachet to me.
Exactly. So that was one of the big learning curves. And eventually I started asking Angus, is that a promise? And then invariably he would say, no, it's not a promise.
Right. Exactly.
Yes.
And I think the penny did finally drop, and you would still use the word agreement. Maybe, I don't know, maybe you did graduate to promise. I guess you did. But then I would have a caveat. Well, like, as long as there's room for me to renegotiate this agreement.
Yes. So that was part of the learning curve for us. The other thing that I had to recognize is that your priorities and timing for things can be very different than mine. And so when it looked like you weren't going to do something, or it didn't look like it was important to you, that would be when I would fall into the nagging behavior.
Yes.
And that what made a really big difference was when I would get more curious about what you really did care about, whether you really were going to do it, and then there was more understanding, and that would have me not need to nag, because I'd get more clear, like, oh yes, you are going to do it. Is this going to take 2 weeks instead of 1 week?
Right.
Or, oh no, that's probably not going to happen, so maybe I should do it myself.
Yeah. I think that all of those things, I'm sure, helped in the grand scheme of things. I'm realizing that a big part of it for me, and I don't think anybody particularly likes to feel controlled. Mm-hmm. And the nagging was for me a feeling of being controlled, which I didn't like. I think that's what I was most reacting to, trying to be pinned down to do something. But still, nevertheless, there was a big learning curve for me there, that that it's important to keep agreements,
Promises.
and keep promises. And that actually is definitely, there was enormous room for me to sort of evolve there, if you like. And I would like to believe that I've got better on that front, because words are important and commitments are important. And I think, again, maybe I think it's safe for me to say that you were probably my first very serious relationship. In a sense, in terms.
Was that your practice relationship?
Well, no. I mean, I think I had plenty of practice relationships, but they weren't for the long haul. So, in a sense, it's like I probably got away with, quite a lot of those sort of moments where I might not keep an agreement. And I think, if you're going to, any relationship, you should keep agreements. But my starter relationships, before I really got serious, that wasn't so much a feature. So I think that things evolved between us where I didn't feel like I was obviously having to, to sort of to make commitments, make compromises, and we're in a relationship. There should be a balance to that. We do have separate realities, and we needed to find the common ground. So there were some teething problems in finding that common ground, and I think a lot of it was language and a difference in culture, which I don't think I ever really anticipated at first. Canadian culture is pretty different to British culture as I see it.
Well, also, I think in addition to the cultural differences, we have very different brains.
Yes, we do.
And so you may fall more on the absent-minded side of the spectrum than I do.
Yes.
And so I would remember things that you don't even remember.
Right.
And so there was just this unrealistic expectation that I would have, that you would track things, that you would remember things, that you would be on top of things. And instead of recognizing we need to work with our strengths and that I should just do a bunch of stuff because I'm good at it and you shouldn't go anywhere near it if I want to have a good life.
Right.
That was part of the teething pains too.
Yeah.
So figuring out like, oh, actually it's not a good idea to even think that that's going to be in the realm of possibility.
Right.
And that doesn't mean anything bad about you. It just means those aren't your strengths.
Yeah.
And that we're actually very complementary in the fact that we have very different strengths.
That's very true. But to sort of, maybe to flog a dead horse.
Yes. You can talk about me being Canadian again.
Yes. Because when I wouldn't hear you or attach so much levity and weight to, not levity, I wouldn't attach so much weight to this word agreement, I probably wouldn't hear it so well. But had I heard the word promise, I'd be like, oh, that's important.
Yes.
And I would have probably done something more about it.
Yes, I did figure that out.
Right.
And then the thing, though, it wasn't so helpful is that you just say, no, that's not a promise. But at least I knew where I stood.
Yeah,
and I wouldn't be nagging you about something you'd already said no to.
Right. But yes, no. So yeah, and I am well within my right on occasion to say no to the odd promise that's been presented at court.
Yes, of course. So Angus, based on our learning, what's helpful for other people?
Well, what's helpful for other people is, and this has been my journey.
Don't marry Canadian.
Don't marry Canadians if you're English, because they are not cut from the same cloth.
You can't put it down to me being Canadian.
No, of
it's
course
like you
not.
can't lump us all into one.
No, of course not. I think that it is very important, agreements, promises, call it what you will. When you make a commitment to do something, it's important to follow through, and maybe there'll be a situation where you might need to renegotiate, but the more heads up you give in that respect, the better it will be. And so for me, it was just like, that was very important to you. And certainly, you can see, tracking back, that I would have had an easier life if I had attached the same level of importance or taken that seriously. Okay. I think commitments are very important. I think there was another reaction for me too, because I just felt like this word agreement was sort of tied up in the field that you were doing of psychology. I felt like this is one of those psychobabble words that gets thrown about, and it's like, it's not for me.
Agreements are for me.
Yes. So I think there was a reaction on that front, but I do see the importance of of taking it seriously.
Yeah.
And I basically I guess just wasn't very good at hearing that word.
Yeah. Well, I think for me, if there's the experience of nagging happening in a relationship, then that's really a signal that there's some missing the mark happening in terms of communication. Like with Angus and I, agreement when meant one thing to me and something different to him. We found that we could meet each other with the word promise, but to really get more curious, to learn more about what each person's reality is, what each person's preferences are, so that there can be more understanding. And I know for us, with more understanding, we got much more creative about figuring out how to deal with our divergent styles of living.
Idiosyncrasies.
That's right.
Yeah, and I think that I've got a lot better at seeing that nagging, the telltale signs of nagging, are an indicator that your state of mind has probably gone a little south.
Yes.
And that I will see the psychological innocence in that, and hopefully be less inclined to take that personally. And I think that I've got much better at not taking that personally and trusting that you will settle, and that if I'm reacting to it is a reflection of my state of mind. So it's like, yeah, best wait for me to settle too.
Yeah. So don't talk about nagging when you're in a low mood, but when you're in a better mood, have a good conversation to learn more about what each person wants, what each person needs, and you'll absolutely be able to bridge whatever cultural differences there might be and find creative solutions. And I think I've got a lot better at not nagging.
You definitely have. And I think that the pivot for me has that I've been able to see it as state of mind, not all the time. But for the most part, I see it as state of mind, and that, you know, that you're feeling, whatever you're feeling, your state of mind has gone south. And I can see the psychological innocence in that on my good days. And then I don't take it personally, and things settle. And I think that's really important for me to see that that's been a big part of our relationship getting to a better place.
Yeah. So if nagging is happening, can you see the psychological innocence of the nagger? Can the naggy not take it personally? And when you're in a better state of mind... I don't know
how I feel about being a naggy.
Well, it's better than a nagger, probably.
Right.
And that when you're both in a better state of mind, can you have a good conversation from a nice feeling place to really understand each other better, to see what misunderstandings can be cleared up, like with Angus and I, differences in the words agreement and promise, differences in what's important and what's not important. Can you have those conversations to truly understand without judgment, and then from that place look to see what the creative solutions can be? And I know that for us, having that understanding has significantly decreased the nagging in our relationship.
Yeah, well, I think, you know, the more honest that we are and the more clear that we are, generally we have an easier life.
Yes, exactly. Well, we hope this is helpful, and have a great weekend.
Have a great weekend.